And we are on to Mage. First up is in Cantors Flow. 2-cost spell, reduce the cost of spells in your deck by 1. I've seen people talking about like, oh, play this with, like they're like, you can Pocket Galaxy early, you can do this, whatever. I feel like this is unlikely to be a card that you play in a deck outside of very specific combos, for a number of reasons. One, it costs you a card. Mage is a class that draws cards pretty well, so that actually is like a pretty less impactful restriction than in some other classes, right? Like Mage has obviously Arcane Intellect, baseline, but with the removal of Acolyte of Pain and Research Project rotating out, you don't have quite as much just sort of card draw as Mage has had in the past. So using a card to just reduce the cost of future spells by 1 is pretty low impact, and especially if you draw this like after your opening hand, like say you draw this like turn 5, like how valuable is this effect unless you are trying to combine to a very specific combination of cards that to spells that can win the game in like a single turn or something. It's very, very expensive. It also only impacts cards, spells in your deck. Doesn't impact anything in your hand, so it doesn't have any immediate impact. You could use it in a deck with like stuff like Cyclone or whatever, but it doesn't affect the cards you get off the Cyclone. So it feels like it's a card that's going to take a lot to happen to go right in order for it to be effective. So I don't expect this card to see that much play, even in like spell heavy decks. Maybe in the like only spell decks, this could be something that like is effectively their wild growth, right? But again, the fact that it doesn't impact the random spell that you generate, and that ends up being a significant number of cards in sort of their pool, ends up being, I think, a pretty big deal. And that is one of the things. It's not like your spells this game cost 1 less. If it were that, it would be insanely powerful, I think, because it impacts randomly generated stuff. But the fact that it only impacts the stuff in your deck makes me a lot less impressed by this, and makes me think that it's mostly going to see play in 1-turn kill combos, if those exist at all. Ooh. Hiccup. Next up we have Netherwind Portal. 3-cost secret. After your opponent casts a spell, summon a random 4-cost minion. This is a really interesting secret. Mage has gotten, I think, other than the sort of classic set secrets, and now and then a pretty powerful one, has gotten, I think, a lot of bad secrets, but this one feels like it's actually pretty impactful. Casting a spell is a pretty easy trigger, and 4-cost minion for 3 mana. Obviously, there's a lot of failure cases at 4 mana. You get like a Twilight Drake or something, but this feels pretty strong. Like in the current metagame, like this, even just hitting like the coin is, I think, one of the big things that makes this really powerful. If you go first, you play this on turn 3. If your opponent coins to try and catch up, they're now behind because you get a random 4-drop. So I feel like this is a pretty strong secret, especially given that it can go into any deck really. I think it can make like decent use of this, because it give you something to just fight for the board when your opponent is trying to develop whatever it is that they're doing. Obviously, it's like weak in like control versus control or whatever, but so are a lot of other secrets as well. So I like this card, and I expect to see a decent amount of play. Next up, we have Imprisoned Observer, a 3-cost 4/5, dormant for 2 turns. When it wakes up, deals 2 to all enemy minions. I feel like I'm going to be saying this about a lot of the Imprisoned cards. This card feels like it is at its best when you draw it early. Shockingly, card in Hearthstone is better on curve than not. But this also is the sort of thing that feels like it maps out to be a lot worse as the game goes on, both in terms of the damage that it deals to your opponent's minions being less relevant in the later stages of the game, as well as the body being less relevant in the later stages of the game as well. That said, this is one of the most powerful things that I can like really think of doing in the early turns as a mage against a minion-based deck, because if they don't play into it, it's like, okay, well, now you have a 4/5 on an empty board, and if they do play into it, you blow up all their stuff. So I think this is a card that can very easily find a home, like a 1 of it Highlander Mage, of course. I don't necessarily think that this is like a card that you build around in any particular way. It's more like you put it in your deck and then you like play toward it. I do just generally, as mentioned with the other imprisoned cards, like the play pattern of the imprisoned cards in terms of giving you and the opponent ways to play into them. This obviously lets you like try and set up a board where going into your next turn, your opponent's like, okay, well they have to like play into because you played out some minions, they have to play some stuff, and it's like, okay, well you just zap them all with the observer, and it can also like play this interestingly to like sort of set up into your other AoEs. Like I think that this is a card that strong players who have good anticipation of the key turns of a matchup and know the certain types of things that players tend to play at different stages and mana junctures. Like for instance, let's say you expect to want to use like Flame Strike or whatever on a certain turn. It's like, well, if they're going to play a 5/5, I want to play my Imprisoned Observer to line up the turn that they normally put the 5/5, so I can my Observer wakes up and I can Flame Strike and it kills it without me needing any extra mana or anything like that. So I love the Imprison mechanic. I think it's really cool and will definitely lead to some interesting planning and play patterns that I think will very much reward experienced and strong players. Interesting card, Evoke Asian, legendary spell for mage. 1 cost, fill your hand with random mage spells at the end of your turn, discard them. This is a very interesting card for like Mana Cyclone style decks that are like, okay, I want to just play a bunch of stuff. I would love to play this card in Quest Mage. Just, you play a bunch of stuff and it's just like, boom, here we go, we're going. Gives you, like, obviously it can be a lot more powerful in a hand or deck situation with Sorcerer's Apprentice. You can just play out a ton of stuff. But obviously this could also just go very, very, very wrong and give you just a bunch of expensive things or situational things. But yeah, one of the interesting things about this is Mage has so many ways to generate random spells already that like you can get other evocations from your random spells. So like if you're playing a deck that like is looking to play into this style of game, you're very likely have like a lot of opportunities to do it. And yeah, this seems especially crazy with like Kael'thas, right? You like if you have Kael'thas, Sorcerer's Apprentice, and evocations, like can you just like basically cast spells forever? Seems pretty powerful to me. So I don't think that this is necessarily going to be like a staple card in like a bunch of mage decks, but I can definitely imagine mage decks that like Crazy Quest Mage style mage decks that are very happy to play this card, and I expect it to be very powerful in those decks and extremely powerful in a lot of other decks when you just happen to randomly generate it. Next up we have Star Squire, a 2-cost 3/1 with Death Rattle, draw a spell. This is a sort of interesting card for a number of reasons. One, it's just a reasonable early game body for mage that comes with not only value but specific value. Is something we haven't really seen that much of in mage. It does have 1 health, which as a 2-drop is not only bad against Demon Hunter but like bad against other mages, druids, etc. Can die pretty easily. But the draw a spell part is obviously very, very powerful. You're getting specific thing from your deck. You could easily imagine this in like a deck that has like mostly minions and specific spells. There's no more Pocket Galaxy in Standard, so you can't like Star Scryer to always draw Pocket Galaxy kind of thing. But you could like Star Scryer and have like say you only had Pyroblasts in your deck, right? And your deck has like Star Scryers and Dragon Casters, and you're like, okay, well, my Star Scryer will always get Pyroblast, and I'll just Dragon Caster Pyroblast you kind of thing. But yeah, it's compare this to just like Loot Hoarder, right? Like Loot Hoarder is a 2/1 draw card. This is 3/1 draw spell. So I expect to see a lot of play because both it gives you the specific selection of drawing a spell, so it has like all these scenarios where it can get you specific stuff or specific category of stuff that you want. Say every spell in your deck is like removal. It's like, okay, well, this is 3/1 draw a removal spell, draw a burn spell, right? If basically every spell in your deck is like Frostbolt or Fireball, this is drawing you just like direct damage. So I think this is obviously going to see play because it's just a good combination of ability and stats, and I think also has the potential to drive specific deck building if there are like very specific things that a deck wants to draw. Next up is Font of Power. 1-cost spell, discover a mage minion. If your deck has no minions, keep all 3. Obviously, this goes into the no spell or no minion mage deck. Duh, just read it. And this is, again, the sort of deck that I can imagine maybe playing in Cantors Flow in, because it's literally all the cards in your deck cost 1 less. This is, I think, actually pretty interesting, because a lot of like spell-heavy decks, one of the challenges with that spell-heavy deck is like, okay, well, how do I win? And this is not only discover a minion, it's discover a mage minion. So the fact that like mage minions, there aren't that many of them. Mage is a very spell-heavy class, and there are a lot of highly impactful ones, like Antonidas, like, you know, the Prime, which we will get to the actual Prime and Mage in a bit. So this, you know, has the ability to hit like some pretty high impact stuff. You can hit Star Scryer. Your spell only deck loves to draw spells off of Spell Scryer. So I think this is actually, you know, if there, obviously this is like one of those pretty obvious things. If there is a spell only mage deck, this is going to be a key card. Duh. It's clearly one of the payoff cards for doing that. But I do think that this is a powerful enough payoff, alongside the other big card we'll get to in a moment, to at least encourage me to want to try to build the deck, and could be, you know, enough in order for that deck to actually be powerful. Next up we have Apexis Smuggler, a 2-cost 2/3. After you play a secret, discover a spell. This card seems very powerful to me. There are actually a lot of good effects relating to secrets in the metagame at the moment. For Mage, there's already the Flax Mage, or Arcane Flax Mage. Is it Flax Mage? Flux Mage? I don't know. Arcane Fleur Mage. That deals 2 damage to your opponent's board off of playing a secret, and Ancient Mysteries or Arcane Mysteries. They're all it's Flak Mage. Flux Mage. I don't know. and then Mysteries, whatever. Ancient, Arcane. They're all a mystery to me. But a lot of payoff for these secrets, and specifically with Ancient Mysteries, the fact that you can get secrets for 0 works very well with the Smuggler and with the Flax Mage, in order to get these additional values for cheap. So being able to play your Mysteries and then play the Smuggler and the Flax Mage into a secret, get an extra card, damage your opponent's board, or depending on the matchup that you're playing, like which one you want to focus on, etc., etc., etc. So I feel like, even in Standard, there's a ton of ways to leverage secrets in Mage right now, and then obviously in Wild there's a ton of powerful stuff for Secret Mage. I don't know if this is good enough to actually make it there. It probably isn't, just because everything else is so good that discovering a spell is just not that big a deal. But I do think that in Standard versions, being able to just generate a little bit of extra value does feel like it's likely to be good enough. And a 2/3 for 2, totally fine stats. And I definitely am going to be looking at playing this in Quest Mage in the near future. Oops. Next up, we have Astroman Sir Solarian, who is a 2-cost 3/2 spell damage. Death Rattle Summon, shuffle Solarian Prime into your deck. So, just a cheap spell damage minion. Obviously, lots of good spells to get spell damage on in Mage. But the Prime version he shovels in, Solarian Prime, spell damage +1, 7/7 for 7. Cast 5 random Mage spells, targets enemies if possible. Why can't my Yogs do that? My Yogs always seem to target me with my Lava Bursts, me with my Fireballs, my opponent's guys with the buffs, but these are all mage spells, and basically pretty much every mage spell is a damaging spell, or like a spell that you want to cast on an opponent's thing. And they're not like buffs that you want to play on your own thing. So casting it on opponents, opposing minions, or your opponent, all very powerful. So this feels like a pretty powerful card, right? And frankly, the cost of putting this in your deck is extremely low. It's a 2-cost, 3/2 spell damage minion. So I expect this to see like quite a bit of play. It doesn't feel like the sort of thing that's necessarily great in control, simply because you don't necessarily make great use out of the spell damage +1, and frankly, just a bunch of random mage spells isn't necessarily that great if in those situations. But if you're like playing any kind of like burn-ish deck, I feel like this is like just a tempo style mage deck. I feel like this is a very powerful card, and I imagine it'll possibly show up in like Highlander decks anyway, just because it's a powerful effect, and it's like you do have like a very strong like board control swing by just playing this and very likely nuking your opponent's board. Next up we have Deep Freeze, an 8-cost spell. Freeze enemy, summon 2 3/6 water elementals. This feels like it looks fairly weak, right? It's kind of expensive. Freeze something, summon 2 3/6s. You're getting 2 water elementals for 8 mana, which is paying full retail for 2 water elementals, but you're getting it from 1 card. One of the big things this does, I think, is give a board presence generator to an all spell deck. It's also something that could be extremely powerful with like Kael'thas. You can like Kael'thas, Ray of Frost, Deep Freeze, boom, make a big board of stuff. I think when I first looked at this card, I was like, oh, this seems weak. And then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, okay, well, I can definitely see homes for this, either with Kael'thas or in a Font of Power Apexis Blast deck, because it fills a role that those decks need because they can't play minions. Also works well with Khadgar, though I think Khadgar's rotating out, right? He was in no. Khadgar's in Dalaran. He's still around, right? I don't know. Is he? Does Khadgar rotate? No, Khadgar's still around. Yeah, he's a pal from Dalaran, so he's still around. Anyway, cut that whole part about Khadgar. We'll start over with Khadgar. He could be pretty It could be pretty powerful with Khadgar as well. Obviously, if you're playing Khadgar Conjurer's Calling, you've lost Mountain Giant, but Khadgar into Mana Giant plus Conjurer's Calling, or Khadgar Deep Freeze, pretty big things that can generate boards as well. So I don't think this is like a staple card by any means, but I can easily imagine decks that want this. And certainly it's a card that you're going to be very happy when you get off of random spell generations pretty frequently for a deck that is looking for ways to actually end games, because this can do that. And last but certainly not least in Mage is Apexis Blast. It's a 5-cost spell. Deal 5. If your deck has no minions, summon a random 5-cost minion. Remember Firelands Portal? Firelands Portal cost 7 and was really powerful. This costs 5. You can't play with minions, but it will blow up something and give you a 5-drop for way less mana. This is extremely powerful. Obviously, the question mark is, how good is the deck that actually has this? And as I go back to Font of Power, these are the 2 real payoff cards for that oops all spells deck. Is your Apexis Blast gives you significant tempo, Font of Power gives you value, and also I think with Deep Freeze again, these are the ways that you can like aim to actually end games despite not having minions in your deck. So I know that all spell mage is something that looks appealing to me. In particular, with the massive tempo you can get from this, and even alongside, as I was saying, in Cantors Flow, if you're playing all spells, in Cantors Flow does seem like it is a valuable thing, especially if you can play it early and then play card draw effects to just get massive amounts of tempo. Like if you play in Cantors Flow and then like Arcane Intellect into Apexis Blast their thing, you get a 5-drop on turn 4. This is just like just a ton of tempo that you're actually getting, and then finish them off with Antonitis you discover of a font of power or whatever. So I feel like this is definitely powerful enough to justify trying to build that deck. And so a lot of it just depends on how powerful is everything else surrounding it. And that's Mage.